On the 16th of April 1947, the final execution of Auschwitz concentration camp took place. Auschwitz was the deadliest site of slaughter of the Third Reich and the Second World War, and within the barbed wire fences of the camp, there were 1.1 million people who died inside of Auschwitz. But the last execution did not occur during the war, and it took place roughly 2 years after the conflict had come to an end, but it was a hugely significant execution. Across the site during the war, hundreds if not thousands of people had been executed on gallows all over the camp, and sometimes there were many people condemned at the same time, during roll call, in front of many other prisoners. The aim of this was to strike fear into the hearts of the inmates. But the final execution of Auschwitz was special, as the man being taken to the specially built gallows was none other than the commandant of Auschwitz, Rudolf Höss, the very man who was given control of the site, and he even oversaw the experiments using gas inside of the punishment centre in Auschwitz. Welcome to The Untold Past. Join us today as we look at the last execution of Auschwitz concentration camp, and to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Rudolf Höss had a very dark past before he became a member of the SS. He had been in 1923 involved in attacks upon rival political groups, and he beat up a schoolteacher who then died upon the orders of Martin Bormann, the later personal secretary to Adolf Hitler. Höss for this was arrested, and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison, but because of his behaviour behind bars, he was released from prison in 1928. He joined the SS following Heinrich Himmler's call to action for people to join up, and he quickly caught the attention of Heinrich Himmler, and the pair then became rather close friends and acquaintances. Inside of the SS, he served in the Death's Head unit, and he first saw action inside a concentration camp serving at Dachau, the first site which opened, and he then, following further promotions, was transferred to Sachsenhausen, where he specifically led execution squads. He was actually in charge of the execution of the first conscientious objector of the Second World War to be killed, and he discharged a finishing shot, or the coup de grace gunshot, to August Dickmann's head, ensuring he was dead. He was a ruthless man, and inside of Sachsenhausen, he became the head of the protective custody camp, and Höss became known for his brutal treatment. He ordered large groups of prisoners to stand outside in the freezing cold with not sufficient clothing, and many of these victims died from the treatment freezing to death. But because of his close relationship with Heinrich Himmler, Rudolf Höss was placed in charge of investigating the creation of a concentration camp in western Poland, and his report led to the building of the camp. He, for his work around this, was placed in control and command of Auschwitz, and the camp became the largest site established inside the Third Reich. Höss dreamed of creating a camp which was ruthless in its slaughter of prisoners, and he wanted to do things differently, creating an efficient camp. He lived close by with his family, who lived in a villa right next door, and it was known that he could switch off rather easily at the end of his shift to become a family man. Inside Auschwitz, Höss ordered the creation of buildings such as Block 11, which was known as a torture and punishment block, and next to this was Block 10, where medical experimentations occurred, with doctors such as Josef Mengele contributing to the death toll. Also, the death wall execution range was found between the two, but in 1941 Rudolf Höss was summoned to Berlin to meet with Himmler, and during this he was told of the final solution, and how Hitler had ordered the extermination of Europe's Jewish population. Höss was told that Auschwitz would be used for this, as it had easy access by rail, and also allowed further isolation, so this could be done in secret. Höss then began to test the best way of mass murdering large numbers of people, and he then settled on the use of poison gas, or the pesticide Zyklon B to be specific, which was used inside specially built gas chambers close to the crematoria inside of Auschwitz. Over time, more chambers and crematoria were built to deal with the scale of the mass murder, and hundreds of thousands of people arrived at Auschwitz. They were then sent straight to the gas chambers. Selections took place where victims were brought to the camp on trains, and when they disembarked at the camp, SS guards were instructed to select people who would work inside of the camp and then be admitted, or if they were considered elderly, infirm or unfit to work, then they were driven straight to the gas chambers. Hundreds of thousands of people were killed in this way inside Höss's camp, and he wanted his guards to send as many people to their deaths as quickly as possible. Höss claimed that, technically it wasn't so hard, It would not have been hard to exterminate even greater numbers. The killing itself took the least time. You could dispose of 2,000 heads in half an hour, but it was the burning that took all the time. The killing was easy. You didn't even need the guards to drive them into the chambers. They just went in expecting to take showers, and instead of water, we turned on poison gas. The whole thing went by very quickly. It took between 3 to 15 minutes for the victims inside the gas chambers to die, and Höss claimed that, "We knew when the people were dead, because they stopped screaming." But Rudolf Höss continued to oversee Auschwitz until in 1943 he was sacked from his position as a commandant. He lost his job due to the fact he had had a relationship with an Austrian communist political prisoner, who then became pregnant, and she was then actually locked up inside of the standing cells found within Block 11. But there were attempts to keep this quiet, but when the SS hierarchy found out, Höss was replaced by Arthur Lieber-Henschel, a man who was certainly not as ruthless as him. Höss swapped jobs with Lieber-Henschel, but he then returned to Auschwitz in May 1944 to oversee Operation Höss. This was a deadly job that saw 430,000 people exterminated within Auschwitz in just 56 deadly days. Höss complained that Auschwitz could not cope with the sheer amount of people killed, and many of these victims were shot in pits, as the gas chambers also could not cope, and the crematorias could not deal with the sheer amount of bodies, and people had to be burned in the open in pits. The final role that Rudolf Höss was given inside of the Third Reich and the SS was to head to Ravensbrück concentration camp, and he got there in November 1944, and he was sent to oversee the creation of a gas chamber inside the all-female camp. Here around 3,000 women were driven towards their deaths by male and female guards, whilst Höss had created the instrument of slaughter, the chamber. But at the end of the Second World War, upon the advice of Himmler, Höss then decided to obtain a false identity and live under the false name of Franz Lang in Gottrupel, and he masqueraded as a gardener. His wife was arrested, and she then gave over information that led to his arrest. It was said that regarding the arrest, Höss initially denied his identity when confronted with Hans Alexander's arrest party, and he, insisting he was a lowly gardener, Alexander saw his wedding ring, and ordered Höss to take it off, threatening to cut off his finger if he did not. Höss's name was inscribed inside. The soldiers accompanying Alexander began to beat Höss with axe handles. After a few moments and a minor internal debate, Alexander then forced them off. Strangely, Rudolf Höss was then called to testify as a defence witness by the lawyer of Ernst Kaltenbrunner during the Nuremberg trials, and this did not help anyone get off any charges, as he brazenly admitted the true destructive nature of Auschwitz. He stated in front of the courtroom, "I commanded Auschwitz until the 1st of December 1943, and estimate that at least 2.5 million victims were executed and exterminated there by gassing and burning, and at least another 500,000 succumbed to starvation and disease, making a total of about 3 million dead. This figure represents about 70 to 80% of all persons sent to Auschwitz as prisoners, the remainder having been selected and used for slave labour in the concentration camp industries. Including amongst the executed and burned were approximately 20,000 Russian prisoners of war, who were delivered at Auschwitz in Wehrmacht transports operated by regular Wehrmacht officers and men. The remainder of the total number of victims included around 100,000 German Jews and great numbers of citizens, mostly Jewish, from the Netherlands, France, Belgium, Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Greece or other countries. We executed about 400,000 Hungarian Jews alone at Auschwitz in the summer of 1944. Höss later revised his death toll to a lesser number of 1.1 million people, and this is accepted as a more accurate total deaths of Auschwitz. He claimed, "I can no longer remember the figures for the smaller actions, but they were insignificant by comparison with the numbers given above. I regard a total of 2.5 million now as too high. Even Auschwitz had its limits to its destructive capabilities." He was then taken to the Polish Supreme National Tribunal, and his trial occurred from the 11th to the 29th of March, 1947. It was obvious what the sentence would be for the former commandant of Auschwitz, and he was condemned to death. Many former prisoners of Auschwitz lobbied the judge to allow the execution to occur within the walls of his former camp, and the judges then accepted this. Because of this, a special gallows was created inside of the camp, near to where the Camp Gestapo was found. Today a plaque marks the gallows at standstill, and it says, Prisoners suspected of involvement in the camp's underground resistance movement or of preparing to escape were interrogated here. Many prisoners died as a result of being tortured or beaten. The first commandant of Auschwitz, SS Obersturmbannführer Rudolf Höss, who was tried and sentenced to death after the war by the Polish Supreme National Tribunal, was hanged here on the 16th of April 1947. The execution of Rudolf Höss had been delayed as there was a great fear that local residents and angry members of the public would seize the former commandant of Auschwitz en route to his former camp, and this delayed the execution by 2 days. Höss arrived at Auschwitz at 8 a.m. on the 16th of April 1947, and he was then taken to the building which was once home to his office. He was given a cup of coffee, and he had no last meal inside of Auschwitz, but after this he was sent to a prison cell inside Block 11, the punishment centre of the former camp, above the very basements where he experimented first with gassing. At 10 o'clock Höss was collected, and he was led out of Block 11 by his executioner and many Polish prison guards, and he was then led towards the gallows. He walked very calmly and confidently towards the execution structure, strutting through the camp, which he once proudly and horrifically oversaw. But Höss, when he arrived at the gallows, had his hands handcuffed and secured behind his back, and the executioner helped him climb onto a stool which was on the scaffold directly underneath the gallows. A priest named Father Zaremba had been appointed to provide final spiritual guidance to the former commandant, and he approached Rudolf Höss, who was stood on the stool, and a prosecutor then read out the death sentence. The priest then took a step back, and the executioner then placed a noose around Höss's neck. There was no black cap placed over his head, and Höss then adjusted the noose with a movement of his head, and then the executioner either quickly kicked out the stool, leaving Höss hanging, or he operated the trapdoor underneath, leaving Höss slowly strangling to death as he fell through. At the point when the rope snapped taut, the priest began to recite a prayer, and the execution officially took place at 10:08 a.m, but then 13 minutes later the former commandant of Auschwitz was declared dead by a doctor and physician. What was significant with the execution of Rudolf Höss was that this was the last execution to occur within the walls of Auschwitz, a place which saw daily executions during the time in which it was operational. Inside Auschwitz there were many different gallows that saw many different people executed at one time on the same structure for breaking the strict camp rules. The concentration camp saw thousands of executions, and over 1.1 million people were killed across the site in some of the most horrific ways. It was seen as some reparation for those prisoners of Auschwitz who survived to see the former commandant, the man who ruled over them with such terror, being executed on the gallows inside his former camp where he inflicted such suffering. The gallows he was executed on still stands as a reminder of the last execution of Auschwitz. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.